As the Blackburn Louis family prepares to show us the newest baby in the congregation, I want to say thank you, John, and thank you, remaining members of the choir here, for an absolutely glorious concert last Sunday. And turning your head slightly, Lewis Patrick Blackburn. Beautiful. Congratulations. Joseph is not a very well sketched in figure, appearing in Luke as a man from Nazareth, whereas in Matthew he lives in Bethlehem. We know he is a tecton, which roughly translates to being an artisan in wood. We see him protecting his family on the flight to Egypt from Herod, and later when he and Mary bring Jesus to the temple when Jesus is 12, well, Joseph's there. And after that, though, Joseph just disappears from the gospel accounts literally without a word, because Joseph is given no lines to speak in this most remarkable story ever told. But what Joseph does do, however, is to make the choice to become deeply involved when even the customs of his time dictated that he should walk away from the situation in which he finds himself. A betrothal to a girl who is pregnant with a child that is not his own. To walk away would have been more convenient. To become disengaged from a situation fraught with complexities is, after all, the simplest thing to do. But in this account from Matthew, an angel visits Joseph and directs him to take on the responsibility of marriage and fatherhood, acknowledging in his statement that to become thus involved will draw Joseph into a demanding role. Who here would do what Joseph did? The result of his involvement in the situation in which we will find him will test him. There will be isolation as he searches for a place for the birth to occur, and more isolation in the non-historical yet compelling story of the flight to Egypt to escape Herod and the slaughter of the innocents. Joseph listens to the word of the angel. And if an angel came to you suddenly, wouldn't you listen to what the angel had to say? The fourth candle in Advent is often named love, following as it does the candles of hope and peace and joy. It is also called the angel candle in honor of the angels who visited and whispered words of hope for the journey, messages of empowerment, and the call to Mary and Joseph to become necessarily deeply involved with the world. And you know, this is when other angels bring messages. Other angels come and bring messages to the shepherds abiding in Shepherd's Field in Bethlehem, calling them likewise to become drawn into what was happening in the nearby neighborhood of Bethlehem. And today's gospel lesson is about Joseph's decision to wake up, spiritually strengthened, and do what is honorable. He is intentional in becoming deeply involved with the great spiritual charge that he has been trusted with, and to embrace his life and embrace his community and embrace it all. Some years ago, Robert Putnam wrote a book called Bowling Alone. Do you remember that book? In which he describes this sense of alienation that Americans have come to feel as a result of being a part of a society that has become less focused on collective experiences of community, with all of the detachment that comes from advances in technology that allow us to choose now to become isolated. Not only to choose to be isolated, but to pick the news of the world we wish to believe to be true. or the news of our country. We have been more and more, since Robert Putnam wrote this book, I believe, alienated. If you walk through an older neighborhood, and Carl and I choose to live in an old neighborhood. Our house was built in 1923, and it's on a block, or a set of blocks actually, that have houses with front porches built onto the front where people could sit and engage with their neighbors. That was the purpose. And now you look today, the modern home has shifted in design to reflect the sense of isolation that our culture feels. What is the main focus of a house today but the large garage in the front, not the porch? It pushes the living areas of the home back where outside noises and sights will not intrude. One may now drive into one's garage and walk into one's house without ever coming into contact with messy neighbors. Our slow disengagement from each other is reflected in our architecture, and we build architecture to suit our needs and desires. So therefore, is this what we desire? Peter Levenheim wrote a book called In the Neighborhood, The Search for Community on an American Street, One Sleepover at a Time. Levenheim received a call to become deeply involved with his own community in a way that might have been almost as shocking as an angel's appearance was to Joseph. 15 years ago in his community outside of Rochester, New York, Robert Levenheim was out walking his dog, and when his parents downsized, he bought back the house that he grew up in, moved back into his old house when it was for sale. And so the street that he was walking up and down that day might have been the same one in which he learned to ride his bike, and many of the houses might have sat in the yards where he played with his childhood friends. He knew this place. This was his neighborhood. And on that day, right down the street from him, he saw a TV news van that was parked outside the house, and he was stunned and confused, and even more so when he discovered that the tragedy was right there in front of him. The tragedy was made known. A neighbor 3 doors down had shot and killed his wife and then himself, and their 3 young children escaped and ran frightened down into the streets until the police arrived. And Levenheim was shocked, not only by these violent deaths, but also by how little true community existed in his suburban neighborhood. He knew the family only slightly, not nearly well enough to sense what kind of trouble was brewing. And not long after, a for sale sign appeared on the front of the house where the killings had occurred, but everything else remained the same. And then the house was sold, the for sale sign came down, and it was as if nothing had ever happened. A family had vanished, yet the impact on our neighborhood was slight, he writes. And he asked himself, how could that be? Did I live in a community or just in a house on a street surrounded by people whose lives were entirely separate? And that begs the question today, I think, in this country. Do we live in communities? Or do we live in collections of isolated houses? Do we know who we are as a people anymore? And so to find an answer, Levenheim decided he was going to do something unusual. He was going to go around the neighborhood and he was going to ask them if he could come to their house for a sleepover. He asked his neighbors if he could come and sleep in their houses. He wanted to know who the people were that he lived among. And one by one, he requested that he be able to spend the night with them in order to get to know them better. His young daughter was upset by this, and she said, "Dad, you are crazy. I don't want to do this." And still, a surprising number of neighbors agreed to his request. And in a sense, angel visitations are also sleepovers. An angel visits Joseph in his dreams and has to assure him that he must make this connection with another human being. He does this during the sleepover. The angel Gabriel visits Mary as she daydreams completely alone. Again, the angel visits Zechariah in his silence, and when they get up the next morning for orange juice and Fruit Loops at the breakfast table, he tells him that he and Elizabeth will not always be lonely. An angel discovers these characteristics in Mary and Joseph and Zechariah: silence, uncertainty, fear, and loneliness. These are the same things that Levenheim uncovers when he packs up his overnight bag and walks over to his neighbor's house for a sleepover. First, a great number of people today are terribly lonely and don't know how to make connections with each other. Lou Guzzetta was the first neighbor Levenheim spends the night with. He died a few years ago. He was a retired physician. He was, quote unquote, a widower with a beer belly who enjoys his afternoon martini, his pet dog, and a local support group. Support group for which of these things wasn't explained. And yet he often feels alone. Guzzetta tries to reach out by taking dinners to new people who move into the community, but his kind gestures are rarely reciprocated. In so many communities today, we've lost the skills and the abilities to create bonds with our own neighbors. And so at one point, Guzzetta says to Levenheim, there are no neighbors in the neighborhood. There are no neighbors in the neighborhood. And it's more than a sad and tragic state of affairs. And you might even say it is a sin. It could be a definition of sin, actually, because theologian Paul Tillich, observing half a century ago, said that separation is an aspect of everyone's experience, and that sin is, in fact, separation. To be in a state of sin, says Tillich, is to be in the state of separation, he said, separation from other people, separation from self, and separation from God. The second discovery of a sleepover angel would make today is that most people are overscheduled and awfully, awfully busy. Why is being busy such a virtue? Why is it the first thing we need to tell people to kind of say, we're on track? Oh, I'm terribly, terribly busy. Well, that's good. You must be living a good life. Working hard to make a living, raising children, pursuing advanced degrees, participating in sports leagues, putting time into hobbies. All these activities, they have value, but when you put them all together, you come up with a frantic and a disconnected life. And neighborly bonds don't have to be dramatic to be helpful. Levenheim and Lou Guzzetta discovered that one of their neighbors was a single mother, and she had cancer. She was dying of breast cancer, in fact. And Guzzetta noted that she had a light out over a kind of a dangerous staircase, and so he fixed that for her. And Levenheim agreed to meet her daughter at the bus stop after school once a week, and today they made sure they got her to her doctor appointments and the grocery store. On their search for community together, they helped to create a little pocket of community. And then Levenheim interviewed people he saw daily on the street, including a woman he called the Walker. She had passed his house every day since the late 1950s, all through his childhood, and later when he returned to live in the neighborhood again. Her name was Grace Fields. She died at the age of 94. She told Levenheim she'd once fallen on the street and she had to crawl to the curb because no one came out to help her. She'd met almost no one on the street through her decades of daily walks, and says Levenheim, Grace had, in effect, invited us all to be her neighbor, but none of us had taken the invitation. And it would be really tempting to circle this today, for me to just circle this into talking about how we are doing as a church community and being neighbors to each other. But I think instead, I wonder if we could take how we do this as church with each other and apply it to the people who live directly across the street from us, or upstairs if we're in a condo complex, or even those people who are next door. You know who those people are. In my case, they are the people who gave their kids a large toy car with a 2-cycle engine that just goes off, which each kid takes turns driving endlessly around the backyard while screaming. The littlest girl has a shriek that starts in a place that only dogs can hear until it moves down into the glass-breaking range when we can really catch it. We assumed over the years that she would eventually grow out of it, but instead she's only brought it to a well-rehearsed perfection. The mom sent me a photograph of her lawn with shade from our trees on it, and her complaint was that her lawn is not getting enough sun because our trees are putting shade on it, and I told her to take it up with the sun. You've had a neighbor like that, you know? How do we take the strength Joseph had when he woke from an angel-fortified dream that informed his decision to take on raising a child that no one else would have, someone other, a presence that would bring stares and criticism, a special needs child, one who called attention to his parent or parents wherever they went together, and later called the attention of the authorities after he left home as the deeply challenging presence that would be arrested, imprisoned, and subjected to capital punishment. Can we identify with that, or with that family, perhaps in our own neighborhoods, which embodies some aspects of that description? Joseph brought Mary to a place where it was said no room was made available to them. And in the humblest of places, the story goes, the shepherds came bringing whatever it was they had to offer. Bethlehem neighbors all, though these were neighbors without proper homes. And so how do we, as people similarly engaged with community and families as Joseph was, how do we see our own neighbors without homes? The residents of America's own shepherds' fields, the disenfranchised, the nomadic, living there in their cars or under overpasses, or what hospitality can there be from us when they arrive bringing us the gift of conscience when we meet their eyes? Today's gospel is about Joseph's decision to wake up spiritually strengthened and to go out and do what is honorable. His is the intentional decision to become deeply involved with this great spiritual charge he has been entrusted with, and to embrace his life and his community and the world around him as he knew and understood it. And the story leads to the birth we will celebrate, and none too soon for us, of someone who would show us the way. And so let us, in this season, let it lead us to finding new strength for those challenges all around us, and for an intentionality for finding ways to love our neighbors, whoever they are, and wherever, and with whomever they live, and whatever their politics, and whatever the place of worship or lack thereof, or appearance, or age, or country, or gender identity, or whatever it is that tempts us to disengage when the world and everything we name as good calls us instead to be deeply involved in this continuing to create relationships of mutual respect and understanding. Amen. Let's rise and sing our closing hallelujah.